right now. Very pleased to have with us Theodore Broman, the Margaret Thatcher Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. And Theodore, thank you so much for coming on the program tonight.
Absolutely, Cam. Great to be with you and your listeners.
It's great talking to you. Heritage.org, you've got a new paper out, the UN Arms Trade Treaty, still seriously flawed. We just saw this latest round of meetings building up towards the big summit in 2012. What does this document look like at this point?
Right now, the document has been drafted by the chairman of the working group there, and it's not really a treaty yet. It's what they call a working paper. And this last meeting in New York that took place last week was where all the nations of the world got together, read this paper, and then made a series of statements on it. And then the chairman will go back, make some more drafting amendments, and then come back with a treaty probably in early 2012, circulated around the nations, and then they'll have the final conference you talked about probably in the summer of 2012 on it.
Yeah, one of the things that kind of concerns me, I'm operating under the assumption that pretty much everything President Obama does at this point is geared towards helping him win re-election, and this provides such a political opportunity for him and a campaign opportunity for him going to this a big summit in the summer of 2012, just a few months before the election, and being able to walk out and say, well, we got something done, people, and I'm really afraid you could be looking at a bad treaty. As a matter of fact, the Canadian government wants to take out sporting arms from this, and they have been met with a great deal of skepticism and derision from the global gun banners at the UN, who on the one hand say this isn't about civilian arms, this isn't about the guns that you and I own, and then on the other hand, as soon as somebody says, we'll exempt them from the treaty, oh, no, we can't do that.
Yeah, we really owe the Canadian government a huge vote of thanks on this. All people in the U.S. who are concerned with Second Amendment rights, I think, should really stand up and cheer Prime Minister Harper in Canada, who has really just done outstanding work in trying to inject just a note of sanity into this whole treaty-making process. And you're absolutely right. There's no legitimate reason, if this treaty is not going to affect civilian firearms, why they shouldn't just specifically say that in the treaty. But, of course, they don't want to say that because there's always this idea at the back of their heads, or maybe even on the front of their heads, that this treaty down the road might be used to clamp down on things they don't like very much.
Right.
And ultimately that means Second Amendment rights.
Yeah, I mean, here's a quote from a guy named Ken Epps, who is with a program called Project Plowshare. He says, quote, "The Arms Trade Treaty does not apply to civilian ownership or domestic transfers of firearms or any other type of weapon. It's about ensuring effective regulation of international transfers of conventional weapons." But he also said, quote, "The Canadian stipulation that sporting and hunting firearms should be exempt from the scope of the treaty reveals that the Canadian government is living in a regulatory dream world. It has proved impossible at the international level to agree to a distinction between civilian and military small arms and light weapons." So, talking out of both sides of his mouth, I mean, on the one hand, it doesn't apply to civilians, but on the other hand, it has to apply to civilians.
Well, the only person who's living in a dream world is the individual who made that quotation, because the real dream world is the idea that a treaty like this is going to affect the Islamic Republic of Iran, or North Korea, or China, or Russia, or Zimbabwe, or Libya. I could go on and on and on. Whatever this treaty does in the United States, it's going to be bad news. But if it were to have any good effects on the global trade in arms, it's absolutely not going to do anything to control the bad guys. Let me just ask you a really simple question here.
Sure.
Every nation in the world says that they're in favor of regulating the global trade in arms. So why do we need the treaty? Why don't they simply pass their own laws and enforce their own laws?
Right.
And I'll tell you why they don't do that. Because a lot of them supply guns to terrorists and criminals because that's their policy.
Yep. And that's
so
why
are we doing a treaty?
Well, exactly, because you can look at like the Kyoto Protocols, frankly, and what you saw and what you've seen is that the nations that are the biggest polluters aren't going to sign on to a treaty like that, and the nations that frankly are already voluntarily taking steps to reduce pollution, they're not going to sign on because that that cripples them economically in terms of competition. That you're right, the bad actors out there aren't going to agree to a treaty, and they're certainly not going to abide by any sort of treaty. Meanwhile, we already have marking and tracing on U.S.-produced firearms. We already have a regulatory process that has been implemented here in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to coin a phrase or anything like that, but I'd call this a strategy of hope and change. In other words, it's a strategy of hoping that the bad guys change their minds.
Hey, listen,
because you've done something.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we're going to be. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this develops over the next 12 months. And again, I believe that the Obama administration is going to want to try to use this to the optimal political advantage, and that tells me they're going to want to get something done.
Well, I think they're going to try their very hardest, but there are a lot of people in the U.S. who are going to oppose them. Let me just give a big shout-out here to Senator Moran, who has gotten 44 of his colleagues in the Senate to sign a letter that was endorsed by the NRA expressing very serious concerns for Second Amendment reasons about this arms trade treaty. And that letter has just been released a few hours ago.
Yep.
So you've got 44 members of the U.S. Senate, led by Senator Moran, who have stepped up and done the right thing on this treaty. And if those 44 stay strong, this treaty will never be ratified by the Senate.
Absolutely.
So
hey,
that's great news.
You are absolutely correct about that. Theodore, thank you again for coming on the program, sir, and I look forward to doing this again soon.
Absolutely. Pleasure to talk with you.
You too. Have a great weekend. Theodore Broman, the Margaret Thatcher Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation.